Solium Infernum is actually a remake of a 2009 game of the same name, and it's this 4X strategy game set in hell that has some really interesting points to it, but it can get rather complicated, so I'm here to help you get started. Now today we've been sponsored by League of Geeks, so click the link below to check out the game, and the tutorial provided in the game is great, but after many hours of me playing this game, here's what I think that you should know so you don't trip up on a lot of the basics at the start. Now, what is Solium Infernum? It's a challenging turn-based 4X strategy game set in hell, where you have 8 Archfiends to choose from, each with their own special powers and abilities and units, and it's kind of like Civilization, but in hell. There's a single player versus AI mode, and there are ordered scenarios, which is kind of like the campaign, but there's also this very easy to play multiplayer mode where you can play with friends and create games quite easily, and you can play asynchronously or synchronously with up to 6 players. So the various ways of playing multiplayer, it's great for long single sessions, or you can break it up and play it turn by turn in these matches over days or even weeks if you're busy. But here are the 9 strategic tips and tricks that I want to share with you so that you can dominate in the game versus the AI or against your friends. Pay attention. That's right, you have to know who's going first. And this is actually one of my favorite things about Solium Infernum. There's this very unique turn order in terms of who's going first next turn, because the turns play out at the same time. So if one player starts first, they inherently have an advantage. So how this game fixes that problem is that there's a regent system. Every turn, the next player becomes regent, and regent is the player which will go first. So the way it works is that in this game you have multiple order slots. At the start you can do 2 orders per turn. You can level it up and get more order slots. The way it works is that at first, the regent, the one who's going first, will play their first order, and then the next player down the line will play their first order, and then the next player after that will play their first order, all the way until all the players have played their first order. And then it goes back to the regent, and they play their second order, and then the next player's second order, next player's second order, and so on. This way, everyone gets their first order played before any of the second orders play out, and then of course the third orders and beyond that. And this is something that you have to pay attention to, especially when there's combat and units moving around, because you can give an order for your unit to move, but if someone else moves their unit in the path of where you are gonna move, well then your unit's not gonna move. They're gonna get stuck because they were told to move through something that now there's something in the way. So whether you tell your units to move on the first order or second order, very important. And also, if your regent or your enemy is the regent, then you have to keep that in mind, because you might give an attack order, but if you put it on your second order, or if they're the regent and they put an order on the first order, they'll play first or you will play second, and you just have to pay attention to who's actually moving first and who's moving second. Plan for combat phases. Now, combat in this game has 3 phases. There's ranged, melee, and infernal. And each unit has 3 different strengths. Now, the strengths, they just math up, right? If you have 9 range and the enemy has 5 range, you deal 4 damage. If the enemy has 10 melee and you have 2 melee, then you will take 8 damage, right? It just adds up and the remaining number gets dealt. But you have to keep in mind, some units have like 16 infernal, but 0 range and 2 melee. So in many cases, you can kill a unit before it even gets to their strongest phase. Like if they have 8 health, and you have a unit with 10 melee, and they have 0 range, 2 melee, you'll deal 8 damage before it even gets to the infernal phase, so they don't get to play their most powerful strength. But you have to keep in mind that there are sometimes various modifiers. There are Praetor units you can attach to a unit, or just abilities for certain units, artifacts that you can attach to units, where it rearranges the order that gets played. Some of these effects are that melee plays last, or that range plays twice. At the end, it goes range, melee, infernal, and then they do another ranged attack. Those sorts of units exist. So sometimes you have to pay attention to this because maybe you'll win, but then the final bonus ranged phase will actually make you lose. Or you have a strong melee unit, but then they have something that means the melee phase gets played last. And then you don't actually get to there and your unit dies. So you have to plan for these combat phases because it can mean the difference between total domination and just dying. Prior means higher. What I mean by this is the earlier you do things and the earlier you acquire things, quite often it means the higher the reward you're going to get. So for example, when you're capturing places of power, these points of interest on the map, they provide prestige. Sometimes it's 1 point per turn, 2 points per turn, but it's prestige per turn. So the earlier you capture the point, the more prestige you're going to get in the long run. You know, if you delay capturing 2 prestige per turn place of power by like 5 turns, well, you lose 10 prestige, right? The earlier you capture these points, the better. Also, capturing them earlier quite often means that the enemies and your opponents can't capture them because you can't just go to war in this game. You have to set up an insult and then a vendetta. There's this whole casus belli system where you can't just go to war and do whatever you want. Capturing an unconquered place of power means that the enemy can't take it until they do the proper diplomacy. Similarly with ranking up your Archfiend. At a certain rank, you unlock a new order slot, and going from 2 order slots to 3 order slots per turn is actually huge. And having a 3rd order slot earlier on means you could collect more money earlier on. You can tell your units to move more, you can place more bids, you can collect more manuscripts, you can do all sorts of things earlier and faster, and the more turns you have with a 3rd order slot means the more you can do. So you have to act quickly. Prior means higher. Praetors. Now, Praetors are this kind of hero that you can bid on in the bazaar, and you attach Praetors to either units or places of power, even your stronghold, which will increase their stats and sometimes give them more abilities as well. So you want to get one early for a couple reasons. First of all, attaching them to a unit makes that unit much more likely to capture a place of power. Quite often, you would have to spend 5 or more turns capturing a place of power because you deal so little damage with your starting unit, or most of the places of power near your starting location might just be too strong for your starting unit, and you have to boost up their strength in some way. So Praetors are great for that, but also, Praetors can represent you in gladiator duels. So when someone makes a demand of you or insults you, you have to respond or reject. Like, you either accept the insult or pay their demand, or you reject it. And if you reject it and say, no, I'm not accepting your insult, or you're not going to pay what they're demanding, then the enemy gets a vendetta. They have an excuse to go to war with you, you know? So what you can do instead is Praetors can duel for you in these gladiator-like duels. And quite often, early on in the game, people send these insults or make these demands, and they don't have a Praetor. So if you go to the duel and you put your Praetor there, well then, if they don't have one, and no Praetor shows up on their side, you automatically win and they lose prestige. So early on, having an early Praetor is actually really, really good. But also, even if they have a Praetor, there's a good chance you'll win the duel. And you can avoid these early unwanted vendettas or just dismiss a lot of these insults and demands until they get stronger, at which point you will be stronger as well. So having an early Praetor is just really, really good. Patch up your units. They heal next to places of power. It's not immediately obvious, but when your units take damage, like even just a point or two, if you set them next to a place of power and have them stay there a turn, they will heal up. Also, there's various abilities which make them heal more. Like if you level up your own powers, there's some that allow units to heal faster when they're resting next to places of power. Also, there are spells that allow you to heal up your units as well, which can be very important because if you go into vendettas or just later on in the game when people have high levels of deceit or whatever, and they can actually just cast offensive spells on your units, they could quite easily die, so you might want to have some healing spells ready to go. But just keeping your units next to places of power generally means that they heal up faster. You should also keep in mind that as these units heal next to places of power, and places of power themselves heal over time, when you're fighting other units, do make sure you keep in mind how much they're gonna heal over the next turn, right? You might say, okay, they have 5 health, I'm gonna do 5 damage, and you attack them, and they don't die, because they healed 1 point over the last turn, so they didn't actually die in that kill because they healed, and then you attack them. So keep in mind the healing next to places of power in particular. Procure money. There's 4 types of currency in this game, and they're used for various different things. You'll get used to which ones are used for what over time, but seeking tribute is something you can put in your order slots to acquire money. And it's very important to get a lot of money, because it's used for all sorts of things. Bidding on units or stuff like artifacts and manuscripts. You can pay off demands to avoid vendettas even if you take a prestige hit. Sometimes it's just better that way. Or you could use it to level up your own powers, you know? So seeking tribute is very important, and you're going to do a lot of it, but what might not be immediately clear, it is explained in the tooltip, but if you put seek tribute in your first order, you actually get more tribute. If you put it in your second order, you get less tribute. This is so that you have to choose. There is actually a purpose of putting seek tribute in the first order slot, but that means you're giving up your first order slot to the other players who might be moving units or stuff on their first order slot. So when you're generally not in a war, and it doesn't really matter whether things go first or second for you, then if you're seeking tribute, put it in the first order slot because you'll just get more. And then, play your event cards. Quite often through the game, for various reasons, you'll get event cards. You'll get to pick, like, oh, you could have this card or this card. And just personally, I keep forgetting that you actually have to play these cards. You have to open up the menu, select the event card, and play it with one of your order slots. These event cards can be like the bazaar is shut down, or a unit gets a promotion, all sorts of things like this. And event cards, they go into your inventory, and it's not immediately clear on the screen when you're just playing that you have event cards to play, but you can open up a menu and then play the event card. Just remember that you have them and they're an option that you can play. I keep forgetting myself that I keep forgetting that these exist. I just keep collecting event cards the whole game and forgetting that, oh, they're there to be played when they might be the best thing to do. So just remember, play your event cards. Prioritise. You can't do everything. So besides the turn order, one of my favorite things is the extreme limitation on the order slots. Having 2, or even when you level up and get 3 order slots per turn, it's not a lot. You could be seeking tribute, you could be consolidating your money, you could be acquiring manuscripts, you could be putting a bid on the bazaar for all sorts of things, you could be moving a unit, arranging a stratagem for that unit, assigning a praetor or artifact or manuscript to a unit, you could be casting a spell, you could be leveling up your skills, you could be coming up with a plot, you could be sending an insult or a demand. There's just so much you could do in this game. You can't do everything. You just can't, right? Even if you have 3 order slots from very early on in the game, there's just not enough order slots or turns to do everything. So you have to prioritize. In the game in general, pick a path that you're going to be sticking to. Are you going to be focusing on units? Are you going to be focusing on diplomacy? Are you going to be focusing on your secret plots? But also turn by turn, you have to prioritize every single turn. What are you going to do with your 2 or few more order slots? And which ones are you going to do first, second, third, and so on? You have to prioritize. Keep in mind what you're actually trying to achieve. And this need to prioritize constantly is actually it's a really good feeling, because it means that your good decisions and your good planning really get rewarded. And if you're just throwing out orders randomly, then you're not going to be able to keep up with someone who's actually planning their moves step by step and reacting to things appropriately. When things go down, well, you have to prioritize what is the most important thing right now, right this second. But also, try to keep in line with your grand scheme. And speaking of things going down, prepare for the unexpected. Which I know you can't really prepare for the unexpected, but especially when you're just starting this game, there's just so much that can happen that you just don't know can happen. A unit of yours can just die. An event can happen and it'll be like, yep, one of your units just died. Or maybe they got assassinated by an enemy and you don't know who did it because they're deceitful. Or there's a demand where you have to send a unit off to some distant war. You know, a giant monster could show up and just start wrecking things. They try to be fair, but let's face it, they're gonna go for one person first, one person second, and so on. They could be going for a unit or be going for a place of power, and you might have one or the other, or both, or neither. Other players could have secret prestige-giving plans where at the end of the game it looks like you're gonna win, but then secret plots can play out, and suddenly one of your opponents has way more prestige than you thought they had. There's just so much that can happen in this game. There's so much going on behind the scenes with every single player, and the game itself can be very, very unexpected and changing situations turn by turn. So you have to be ready, not so much to perfectly deal with unexpected situations, but when an unexpected situation happens, just understand that this is the game, and it's supposed to throw a wrench in the works for everyone who had these perfect plans lined up, and then suddenly it's just gone, and you have to do something else. So prepare to change plans, prepare to adapt, because you cannot predict everything that's going to happen in this game, in single player and especially in multiplayer, where who knows what your friends are gonna be doing. And there you go, that's 9 strategic tips and tricks for Solium Infernum. Now, if you have any other strategies or advice for players of the new Solium Infernum game, do let me know down below and share, because it could really help people. But yeah, that's gonna be my 9 strategic tips and tricks for you getting into the game after you play the tutorial. So thank you so much to League of Geeks for sponsoring us today. Remember to click the link down below to check out the game. And Solium Infernum is released right now. Just have a look. It's really fun. I've been having a good time with it. And it's not quite like any other strategy 4X out there right now. I mean, it's a little bit like Civilization, but really there's nothing else that's quite like this. So if you're looking for something different thematically and gameplay-wise, then Solium Infernum is quite an interesting one to check out. Also, if you want to see my raw gameplay of this game, I have a video of me playing through from start to end a full game. So there's no secrets to what Solium Infernum is. Check out that video if you want. It's on the channel. Just search Solium Infernum. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.